I'm showing up on your For You page because you want to learn more about what happened in Las Vegas and New Orleans. My name is Chris Goldsmith. I am a U.S. Army veteran, and I am an expert in veterans policy and politics and extremism. And veterans and extremism. I run two organizations, Task Force Butler Institute and Veterans Fighting Fascism. Task Force Butler Institute trains veterans to conduct open source intelligence research into domestic extremist organizations. And Veterans Fighting Fascism has the mission of educating Americans on the problem of extremism in our country. We don't just identify problems, we propose solutions and work towards them. In this video, I'm going to give you some resources so that you can learn a bit more about the problems of extremism in our country and how these issues impact veterans, and provide you some things to do so that you can start better understanding how we got here and what we can do about it. So two resources I want to recommend to you. One is the book Bring the War Home by Kathleen Belew. Kathleen Belew is a professor who's been studying the relationship between veterans and extremist movements, not just as they exist today, but throughout our nation's history. So her book, Bring the War Home, talks about how there are patterns between our nation's involvement in conflict, international conflict, wars, and domestic conflict like the Civil War. And throughout her book, she shows how every time that our country is engaged in these kinds of conflicts, as the conflict winds down, we see a rise in domestic extremism. Now, to be clear, this is not domestic extremism that is the fault of veterans or entirely involves veterans. This is a correlation between United States military conflicts and then domestic extremism. Now, statistically, veterans are not more likely to become extremists. I know there's going to be a lot of stuff online and in the media about veterans with PTSD and veterans with PTSD becoming extremists and experiences at war becoming radicalizing catalysts. That is sometimes the case, but we're talking about small numbers. Recent studies have shown that veterans are less likely to pick up conspiracy theories and radicalizing content than the average American. That's right, veterans are less likely to be convinced by extremist narratives and conspiracy theories than the average American is. So that probably dispels some of the stereotypes that you may have had about me and people like me. But what recent studies have also shown is that when veterans are involved in extremist acts of violence, they're more effective. So what that means is if a veteran engages in extremist violence, it is more likely to be a mass casualty event, and they're more likely to have more victims than the average American who becomes an extremist and engages in extremist violence. So Kathleen Belew's book, Bring the War Home, talks about how there's an American appetite for violence. When we engage in foreign conflict or domestic conflict like the Civil War, there is something about our country and our culture that makes the violence turn inwards after these conflicts are over. The United States just went through our longest period of active war ever. 20 years of the global war on terror, you can name it whatever you want. Operation Iraqi Freedom, Operation Enduring Freedom, Operation New Dawn, whatever. It's all the global war on terror. So after 20 years of this conflict, we're going to see another curve of rising extremism. We are at the beginning of this rise. What happened on New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, these are just two data points in a curve that, if Professor Belew's theory is correct, we're at the beginning of that curve. And it's set to rise. The 20-year conflict is unique in American history, so we don't know what to expect after that. The second resource that I want to offer you is the Against All Enemies documentary. If you Google Against All Enemies documentary free, you will be led to a link on the video platform where you post longer videos. And you'll see a free documentary that really gets into the involvement of veterans in extremist movements historically and today. This documentary is not just about all of the problems, it's also about solutions. Now, full disclosure, it features me and my organization in the documentary. So while we all should be concerned about veterans who become extremists, I want to make sure that you have your attention on veterans who are working to fight against this problem. My organization, Task Force Butler Institute, has been working to identify extremists who engage in criminal activity before they engage in acts of mass violence. Our goal is to impose legal consequences on them ahead of any acts of violence. So we're talking about things like property destruction, intimidation, harassment, or low levels of violence, because typically extremists escalate up a ladder. Most extremists start to dabble in these things before they go to commit a terrorist act. So we want to identify them when they're in chat rooms and they're talking about their plans. Because a plan for a terrorist act, whether it's racially motivated, ethnically motivated, religiously motivated, a plan to do harm to a person or a community, that is criminality. We want to gather the evidence at that point. We don't want to wait until it's too late and someone's already gotten hurt. If you want to learn more about what just happened in Las Vegas and New Orleans, in the sense of the bigger picture of what's going on, my book recommendation to you is Bring the War Home by Kathleen Belew and the documentary Against All Enemies. I'm going to drop links to these in my link tree, so if you want to pick these up, the documentary is free. You can buy the book anywhere that you can get books. And if you have questions about this type of thing, ask me, and I'll do my best to help you understand what's going on here.